Tonight I'll be showing you guys how to install on your 1994 Mazda MX6 all the parts that you'll need as far as your oil system goes to turbocharge your car. That would be the tapped oil pan and your oil feed and drain lines. The first step is going to be draining your oil. To drain your oil, first you must jack up your car. Jack up your car and safely support it with jack stands in the proper locations. With your car safely supported, you can get underneath the car and go ahead and start to drain your oil. I'm going to attempt to drain the oil back into a container because I only have around 3,000 miles on my oil, and I'm going to go ahead and put it back in, seeing as it is synthetic. So I'm going to try and drain it into that, but if that doesn't work, there's always an oil pan. Oh no! Oh God! That was a terrible idea. Chalk that one up as a failure. This is working okay. I spilled a lot of oil. Whoops. Make sure your funnel flows just as fast as your oil pan does if you want to do it that way. Oh well, first for everything. After you've cleaned up the horrible mess of spilled oil, I actually got most of it in the can, but after you've cleaned that up and gotten everything done, just let it drain and drip, and then you're going to be able to start to take off the oil pan. So right now I'm filtering all this old oil into this jug through a coffee filter just to make sure that no contaminants get into this oil that I'm going to reuse. All the way around the outside of the oil pan there are bolts. There are small ones and there are some big ones over here. Those all have torque specs, and you're going to have to take off all of them before you can drop this oil pan. I've discovered that the small oil pan bolts are 10 millimeter. These are not on here very tight at all. There are two big bolts up by the transmission that are 12 millimeter. And these have all been really loose for me. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but just go ahead and get all those out and put them in a little jar. So strangely, this bolt can't come out until it clears that bolt on the transmission. So I might have to take that out, or I'm hoping that when I drop the pan down a little bit, it'll give me a little bit more play so I can pull this out past that bolt head. But with all of your bolts undone, you should be able to just pull on it, and the only thing holding in right now should be the gasket and the gasket sealant stuff. Go ahead and pull that down. It looks like the more major problem that I've run into is that this little loop on the exhaust on my headers is actually touching the oil pan, and it's pushing up on it, preventing it from coming down. Now since I'm turboing, I'm already going to be taking this off, so I guess take off the collector pipe will be the next step. I'm just going to do it, but I'll cover it in more in depth in the how to install turbo headers video. But after that, I should get a little bit better access to that. If not, I'm going to have to take off that bolt too, which I'll be very unhappy about. So take off your collector pipe. With the exhaust off, you can see exactly where it was touching and rubbing. So with that off, you should be able to drop the oil pan by using a screwdriver or something and putting it on there. Be careful not to damage the mating surface, or your new oil pan will not seal right. So I have effectively dropped the oil pan now, but that transmission bolt is still in the way. So you're going to have to remove that one, at least enough to pull that bolt out. And then your pan should just come down, because right now it's just hanging there by that one bolt. This bolt is really stuck on there, so I'm having to use a breaker bar to get that transmission bolt out. With that bolt down, voila, you've got an oil pan. I don't know how well y'all can see that, but oil pan's down now. Here's what the underside of, well, I guess the inside of the oil pan looks like. I guess that's where your oil pump sucks in. Right in there. That's cool. Bottom of the engine laid bare. Time to put your turbo oil pan on. Let's go. Okay, I moved it into the light so you guys can see it a little bit better. And this is your oil pan. This is the inside of your oil pan. It's a good time to check and see if you've got any, cylinders in there or not. Here you can see my magnetic oil drain plug. How that little magnet sticks in there. It's the blue thing. And as that oil is swirling around, little bits of debris and stuff will get caught on that, and every time you change your oil you can wipe that off and pull out some bits of debris that are just sitting in your bottom of the oil pan. Here we have our two oil pans side by side. This is the one I just pulled off the engine. It's all oily. And this is the new one that has the tap. They're exactly the same oil pan. Came from the exact same car. The only difference is that this one has this little tap where you can attach, it's got a little hose over it, but that's a 10AN fitting for an oil drain, where the turbo can drain the oil back into the oil pan. It's welded on both sides, and it's got your same drain like it would. I'm going to be swapping over my nice drain plug there, and as with everything, I painted it blue. So yeah, next step is going to be to lay the gasket on this and get it up on the bottom of the engine. So the instructions in the Handman's Manual say not to use the gasket that for some reason Felpro sells for this oil pan, but it says to use an RTV sealant, which I'm going to be using this Permatex Ultra Black, which I've used in previous videos. It's a maximum oil resistance RTV silicone gasket maker, which is exactly what they want. And basically you're going to prep and clean off that entire surface of any of the old gasket with a little scraper, making sure not to damage the mating surface, and then just follow the directions on the RTV as far as that goes. Per the instructions of the Permatex Ultra Black, I've scraped off the gaskets on that and cleaned off the gaskets on the car. I'm going to apply a 4 to 6 millimeter bead of gasket maker all the way around the edge, making sure to be on the inside of the bolt holes specifically. I'm going to put it on the outside as well. Immediately it says I'm going to immediately apply it up to the bottom of the car and lightly put the bolts in until it's finger tight. After an hour, I'm going to come back and tighten it a quarter to a half turn and then let cure for 24 hours. That's what the instructions say. That's what I'm going to do, and hopefully I don't have any leaks with it. Let's give it a shot. So I've got the RTV on, Permatex Ultra Black. I'm going to go ahead and put it up on the bottom of the engine and put some bolts in finger tight. So I've got the oil pan up there now. Got all the bolts in. It's nice shiny blue. There is, right there is where your 10AN oil drain is going to be. I've tightened down the gasket, just finger tight, and I'm going to let it sit for an hour. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to tighten these bolts up a little bit more. yeah, that's your basic oil pan installation. Okay, so I've got my torque wrench set in between 14 and 16 foot-pounds, and I'm going to go ahead and tighten the two larger bolts on the oil pan. For the smaller bolts, the torque spec is around 80 inch-pounds, which is around 6.5 foot-pounds, because I don't have the right size thing, so I'm converted it to foot-pounds instead of inch-pounds. But go ahead and tighten all those, starting from the middle and working your way out. After you've got all of your bolts in and they're all torqued down right, you want to make sure that you put back in that transmission bolt that you took out, and then we can get started on attaching the oil feed and drain lines to the turbo. Next, you're going to need to source a spot to get your oil feed from. I'm going to tap mine from the oil filter sandwich plate that I already have. So for that, I'm going to go ahead and remove the oil filter. So I got the oil filter sandwich out of the car. This is a sandwich adapter. It goes in between the oil filter and the block. This is where you're going to tap. It's got holes 1/8 MPT where I'm going to run my oil feed line from. Right in there. Make sure you use the oil safe Teflon tape on all the little fittings so that you don't get any leaks. So I got a right angle fitting just to sort of orient it downwards when this is going to stick up on the bottom of the car so that my oil feed line can go around that way. Use lots of the tape. Make sure that I have no oil leaks. So here's a closer look at the oil filter sandwich adapter. That's the little, I guess the male end where the filter screws in, and that's where your little adapter is going to screw on. I put some Teflon tape on there too. You can see the oil filter sandwich is in. I've got my right angle adapter for the oil feed line, and the other two are blanked off right now. Your oil filter is just going to screw right on top of that. You can see the oil feed coming out of there, and it's going up into the engine bay where it will meet your turbo up there in the light. The next thing you're going to need to do is to connect your oil drain line to the oil pan. The oil pan has a little connector right there. It's got it masked off with a rubber glove, but there you go. That's where it's going to attach. And then you're going to run that one up into the engine bay where it will connect to the bottom side of your turbo. With the oil drain line attached to the pan, you're going to run it up and into the engine bay where it will attach to the bottom side of your turbocharger. I may route this over the crossmember or wherever, I'm not sure yet, but you're going to mount that to the bottom of the turbo. Up here you can see where the lines ran to. This is going to go into the top of the turbo. This is going to come out the bottom of the turbo. And that's your oil and drain lines, and once you get the turbo in there, they will make sure that it doesn't blow up. Now we're going to attach the oil drain and feed lines to the turbo itself. You can see them down there. You can really only see the drain line because it's big, but the little one next to it is the feed line. And they're both going to come across and up underneath the turbo. You can see the drain line there, and I'm going to bring the feed line up right next to it, and we're going to work on getting them plugged into the top and the bottom of this turbo. Of course, whenever you're using fittings that aren't AN fittings, you're going to want to use some oil safe Teflon tape to make sure you get a perfect seal, because you don't want to leak, especially on the feed side. This is just an adapter to adapt the 1/8 NPT elbow there to a 4AN line that I'm using. So I'm going to install that now. So here you can see a little bit better how I routed these feed and drain lines right up in here. There's the feed line comes all the way up to there. It's a little bit longer, so it can reach where the turbo is going to go. It's going to be sitting right there. Since this doesn't have a little swivel attachment on it, I'm just going to have to spin the turbo around in circles until that tightens up, and then lower that down and bolt on the bottom one. It does spin. Thank Jesus. It was just all stuck on there. I did not know how I was going to get to turn that. Yes, praise the Lord. There's the feed line attached at the top of the turbo. It goes down there with its friends and heads over to the place where we tapped it from. Now we gotta hook up the drain line right there, and that's gonna go on the bottom on a flange just like that, but on the bottom and meant for the oil drain. There's your oil drain flange. It's going to attach to that part on the turbo right there. You're going to want to seal that with a proper gasket and some gasket sealant as well. I've got some lock washers, but go ahead and put that on. It's going to be a little bit difficult. Under here you can see the bottom of the turbo. You can see the oil feed, the oil drain lines, how it's oriented, and sort of the bolts if that little wire wasn't in the way. It's very crowded up under here. Okay, I got the drain line on, and I highly, 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 highly recommend installing it to the turbo before you attach it to the oil pan, because it is the most terrible thing ever to have to try and get that on there. There you can see the line. It's swiveling. I'm not sure if that means that I loosened that fitting right there, but we'll see if it leaks or not. But I highly recommend attaching it to the turbo, so you got little snakes hanging off the turbo, and then run those snakes down through the engine bay to where they need to go. I guess you can attach the feed line after it's in place, but the drain line is terrible to get to. You can't get a wrench on it, you can't move it at all because it's on the bottom of the turbo. So I recommend attaching it to the turbo before you run it to the oil pan for the drain at least. But that's in. I'm going to let some of the gasket material set up for about an hour and then tighten it down a couple more turns, and that's pretty much it. This has been how to install a turbo oil system on a 1994 Mazda MX6. It took me hours upon hours upon hours because I had a bunch of other things to do first. I guess this should be one of the last things that you do, probably after you run the exhaust piping, but if I had to do it again with the turbo in place and everything, it probably wouldn't have taken me too long at all, because you just gotta replace the oil pan and tap some fittings and that kind of a thing. But you're going to want to make sure the first time you start up the car that you pull the fuel pump relay and the distributor plugs and stuff so that the car doesn't start, and you're going to want to crank it a couple of times to pressurize the oil system and force a little bit of oil through the turbo before you run it. This is extremely important, especially if it's a new turbo. is called priming the turbo, because if you start it up and exhaust gas flows through this thing without any oil being in that, even if it's only for a second or two before the oil pressure gets to it, you can cause a lot of damage to the bearings, because your turbo spins at like at like 150,000 RPMs at idle. So you definitely want to have oil in there before, so you want to prime the system before you start the car for the first time. This has been how to install turbo oil system on a 1994 Mazda MX6 V6. Be sure to watch my following videos, because as you can see, we are almost ready to boost. Thanks for watching.